Hey everyone, let's spend a couple of minutes looking at the process for writing out a blood tracing. We have an entire lab devoted to the following question. Trace a drop of blood from blank to blank. And when you trace a drop of blood between 2 points, you are always telling us the sequence of blood vessels between those 2 points. Now here's a formula for you. Think of a trace in terms of 3 parts of a story. Part 1 are always going to be veins. You're going to leave that body part, organ, or region that's noted on your trace, travel on veins to the right atrium. The middle part of your trace is that whole heart, lungs, heart thing you first learned about in the first laboratory content. Right atrium, tricuspid valve, right ventricle. Just because we've moved on in the course content does not mean that the human heart has jumped out of the body and disappeared. So that whole heart, lungs, heart thing, that's coming back. Now, once you leave the left ventricle, pass through the aortic semilunar valve and hit that ascending aorta, you are now ready for the third part of your trace. The third part of your trace will be to travel on the arteries, which are the direct line to your end point. So traces are always going to go veins first, heart, lungs, heart second, arteries third, between the 2 points designated in your trace. So before we get into an example, I always like to say the human body always does what makes sense. Let's say that I give you a trace and say, trace from the hip to the heart, or excuse me, trace from the thigh to the heart. Well, which of the two traces makes more sense? To go from the thigh up to your hip and to find your way to your heart, or to go from your thigh into your hip, maybe take a turn on a kidney, then maybe take a turn in your intestines. Oh yeah, and eventually somehow we end up at the heart. Hopefully you've decided that this first option over here makes more sense. We can see how we would directly go between these regions to the heart. It's not a straight shot, but it's a direct shot from thigh up to the hip, up to your heart. This option over here in green, hopefully, doesn't make a lot of sense because instead of traveling on a straight line between 2 points or direct route between 2 points, over here we're saying start here, go over here, wait, go over here, maybe, oh yeah, and eventually we're at the heart. So I am illustrating the point that when you trace between 2 points, you want to think about this side. What is the most direct route between the 2 points? So let's do an example together. So let's say you've been asked to trace a drop of blood from the right thigh to the right armpit. So let's work this out together and let's take the approach of 3 miniature traces. Your first trace, again, is going to go from the right thigh on veins to your right atrium. That's the first part. The middle part is going to be that whole heart, lungs, heart thing. Your third and final part will be to hit that ascending aorta and travel on the most direct route to your right armpit. So I would suggest hitting pause. Try to work your way through the thigh. I'm going to give you some hints. Your thigh is your femoral region. So start with your femoral region or your thigh, go up your hip to that big giant vein running up the back of your body. That will take you to the right atrium. Then do that whole heart, lungs, heart thing. Hit that ascending aorta and see if you can go ascending aorta across the right shoulder over to your right armpit. So those were some big fat hits. Go ahead and pause and see how you do. This would be the first part. We would start in our thigh and find our way to the heart, right? So we would go from your right femoral vein up to your right external iliac vein. Blood will continue to travel up, and it will converge into your right common iliac vein that will continue to travel up, and this will converge onto your inferior vena cava. So this is part one of the trace. This is how you would get from your right thigh to your right atrium. Hit pause again and see if you remember the whole heart, lungs, heart thing. So here I've animated it in for you. The whole heart, lungs, heart thing is your right atrium, past your tricuspid valve to your right ventricle, past your pulmonary semilunar valve to the pulmonary trunk, into your right or left pulmonary arteries, and then into the capillaries of the lung for gas exchange. Then we'd come back on our right or left pulmonary veins to that left atrium, past the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. Left ventricle squeezes that blood past an aortic semilunar valve into the ascending aorta. So we've got part one done, the veins from the thigh to the heart. We've got part two done, which is the heart, lungs, heart. Now try to pause again and see if you can get from your ascending aorta up across your right shoulder to your right armpit. Hit pause and see how you do. So I know you probably haven't hit pause at all during this video. So the final part of this trace would be your aortic arch to your brachiocephalic artery. Remember, that's the first branch of your aortic arch. Blood would go up the brachiocephalic artery into the branch, which is the right subclavian artery. Travel across that right subclavian artery across your right shoulder, where we would enter the right axillary artery. And at that point, we're in the armpit, so you're done. So again, whenever you're asked to do a blood trace, think in terms of three pieces. Start at the point you're given, travel on veins to your right atrium, heart, lungs, heart in the middle, and then arteries to your end point. When you look at the laboratory and the way this exercise in our laboratory manual is set up, it explains a trace for you, and then it gives you 3 columns of body regions and organs. So the way I recommend you use those 3 columns is the far column on your left. Start there. Travel on veins to your right atrium. Do that whole heart, lungs, heart thing. Okay. And then end at the next organ or region on that column. You would then start there, travel on veins back to your heart, navigate through, and end up to the 3rd body part. When you've done those 3 points, then see if you can trace backwards. Work your way through as many of these 3 body parts or regions or organs back and forth, as many as you can over the next few days. When you're done, you'll see that there are patterns to the body, and you'll start to memorize these traces pretty quickly. What do I mean by patterns? Well, anything above the heart has to end up in the superior vena cava. Anything below the heart has to end up in the inferior vena cava. If you're going to anything above the heart, well, you're going to end up on one of those three branches of the aortic arch. So that would be branches that would take you to your head, your neck, your shoulders, your arms. If you're trying to get to something that would be like below the heart, you're going to have to hit the descending aorta and travel inferiorly in the body. So again, once you do a bunch of traces, you will start to see the patterns in the fact that you have to end up on a vena cava, and that you have to end up either on the aortic arch or on the descending thoracic or descending abdominal aorta. So good luck with practicing the traces, and contact your professor if you have any questions or run into any stumbling blocks.